Welcome to the Crochet Cable Stitch Long Sleeve Top Sweater tutorial. This project works up quickly and is only lengthy in video size, because I've included crochet follow-alongs. Timestamps are included so you can find each part easily. You can find a written pattern on my Etsy if you'd like. Now let's get started! For materials, we're going to be using size 4 weight yarn, a 5mm hook, scissors, tapestry needle, a measuring tape, and some stitch markers. Let's start with a slip knot. We're going to start the ribbing of our sweater by chaining 9. Once we're done chaining, we can move on to the next step. We finished chaining and now we're ready to start row 1. Starting into the second chain from our hook, 1, 2, we're going to insert single crochets into each stitch for a total of 8 single crochets. Once we're done, we can move on to the next step. We finish inserting our single crochets into each chain. We can chain 1 and turn our work to start row 2. Our chain ones do not ever count as a stitch, meaning we will always work a new stitch in the same space as our chains. We will insert a single crochet into the first stitch. From here, we will insert a single crochet into the next 6 stitches back loop only. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finish inserting our back loop only single crochets, leaving us with the last stitch left. We will insert a single crochet into the last stitch in both loops as normal, marking the end of row 2. Our total stitch count is 8 single crochets. We can chain 1 and turn our work to start row 3 and onwards. From here, we will repeat row 2, which is the row we just did. For a size medium, we will continue to repeat until row 100. Continue to repeat row 2 until your work fits around your waist comfortably. Once we're done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our repeat rows. For a size medium, we've done 100 rows. We're going to chain 1 and turn our work so that the top part is facing us horizontally. We'll now be inserting single crochets into each side row, making our way around the work. For a size medium, we should have 100 single crochets by then. Let's do some single crochets together. To start, we will insert a single crochet into the same side as our chain 1 we just made. So insert a hook into that gap, and there's our first single crochet. We can see these gaps in between the rows, letting us know to insert our single crochets into them. So here's the next gap, inserting our hook and making a single crochet. Here's the next row, another single crochet. We're going to continue to do this until we've reached the end of our work. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finish our single crochets into the sides of the rows. These single crochets are now considered row 1 of the next part of our sweater, which is the waist portion. Let's chain 2 and turn our work to start row 2. Remember that our chain stitches do not count as a stitch. We will now insert double crochets into each stitch. For a size medium, we should have a total of 100 single crochets. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finish our double crochets. We can now chain 2 and turn our work to start row 3. We will insert double crochets in the next 28 stitches. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finish our double crochets in the first 28 stitches. We will now start doing cable stitches. For each row, we will do a set of 4. I divide a cable stitch in 2 parts, and we're going to do the first sets together. To start the first part of the cable stitch, we will skip the next 4 stitches, and we're going to work 4 front post treble crochets. So let's begin. Skip the next 4 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to work into the next available stitch, which is this one, and instead of working into the top loops like we normally would, we're actually going to work into the double crochet directly under it, which is a double crochet post. So let's yarn over. We're going to insert our hook behind that double crochet post, yarn over a loop for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first loop only for 3 loops on our hook, yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook, and we're going to yarn over the remaining 2 loops for our first front post treble crochet. And we're going to do this 3 more times for a total of 4 front post treble crochets for the first part of the cable stitch. You're going to see that the front post treble crochet is leaning slightly to the right. This is normal for the first part of a cable stitch. So let's do the next one together. Yarn over, insert hook behind that double crochet post, yarning over a loop for 3 loops on our hook, yarn over through the first loop only for 3 loops on our hook, yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook, yarn over through the remaining 2 loops for a second front post treble crochet. And we're going to do this 2 more times. And there's our 4 front post treble crochets, which is the first part of the cable stitch. Before we start the second part of the cable stitch, we will grab a stitch marker and place it in the stitch corresponding to the latest front post treble crochet we did in the first part. To start the second part of the cable stitch, we will be working 4 front post treble crochets into the initial previous 4 skip stitches. So let's find that first skip stitch, and directly under it is a double crochet post we will be working into. Feel free to stretch your work so that the gaps are more visible. Let's yarn over and insert our hook behind that double crochet post. Our work will twist. This is normal for the second part of the cable stitch. We're going to yarn over a loop for 3 loops on our hook, yarn over through the first loop only for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook, and we're going to yarn over through the remaining 2 loops for our first front post treble crochet. And as you can see, for the second part, the front post treble crochets are actually going to lean to the left. This is normal for the second part. Now we're going to do this 3 more times in the remaining 3 skip stitches that we did initially. So let's do the next one together. Yarn over, find that next double crochet post, inserting our hook behind that double crochet post, yarning over a loop for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first loop only for 3 loops on our hook, yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook, and we're going to yarn over through the remaining 2 loops for our second front post treble crochet, and we're going to do this 2 more times. And there's 4 front post treble crochets into the initial previous 4 skip stitches that we did. And this is our first cable stitch set. You're going to see that the texture is actually these 4 front post treble crochets are intertwined in front of the other 4 front post treble crochets we did earlier. And that's our cable stitch. To finish it off, we're going to insert 4 double crochets into the next stitches after the stitch marker right here. So let's begin. We're gonna yarn over and just insert double crochets into the next stitch after the stitch marker. Now that we have our first cable stitch formed and we just finished our 4 double crochets, we can remove that first stitch marker and we can reuse it for our cable stitch sets. We'll be doing the cable stitch 3 more times now, repeating the previous steps we just did. I'll show you how to do it slowly and feel free to follow along. Once we've done our 4th cable stitch, we can move on to the next step. Now that we've done our fourth cable stitch and the 4 double crochets associated with it, for a total of 4 cable stitch sets, we can continue inserting double crochets into the remaining 24 stitches. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our double crochets. We can now chain 2 and turn our work to start row 4. We will continue inserting double crochets into the first 28 stitches of the row. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finish our double crochets in the first 28 stitches. In the 28th stitch, you'll see a noticeable gap due to the connection of the front post treble crochets in the previous row. This is normal for the back part of our work. We will now insert back post treble crochets that match the front post treble crochets we did in the previous row. For each set, it will be a total of 8 back post treble crochets. To make it easier to work into, we will bring the view of our work slightly to the front so that we can see the front post treble crochets better. To start a back post treble crochet, we will first yarn over, and we're going to insert our hook from the front of the post and go around it so the post is in front of our hook. So let's do that. Here's that first treble crochet post. We're going to insert a hook from the front, wrap it around so that the post is directly in front of our hook. We're going to yarn over a loop for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first loop only for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook. And we're going to yarn over through the remaining 2 loops for our first back post treble crochet. And if we turn our work to the front, you'll see that it's actually extending the post from the previous row to the latest row, and this is the intended part that we want for our cable stitch. Let's do the next one together. We're going to yarn over, and we're going to go from the front again into that next treble post right here, going into the front, wrapping it around so that the treble post is in front of our hook. We're going to yarn over a loop for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first loop for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the remaining 2 loops for another back post treble crochet. And we're going to do this 2 more times for this set, which you can find by stretching your work out slightly from the front, and you can see those treble crochets forming. So let's do the third and fourth one together. We're going to yarn over. We're going to find the next post, which is here, go into the front, wrap around it, yarning over a loop for 3 loops on a hook, yarn over through the first loop for 3 loops on our hook still, yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook, yarn over through the remaining 2 loops for a third back post treble crochet. And to find the fourth one, you're going to need to stretch your work from the front, and you'll see that gap here for the next treble crochet needed. So we're going to yarn over, and we can separate that treble post from the rest, go in from the front, wrap around so that the post is always in front of our hook for a back post treble crochet. We're going to yarn over a loop for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first loop only for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook. And we're going to yarn over through the remaining 2 loops for our fourth back post treble crochet. And that's a set of 4. To start the next 4 back post treble crochets for a total set of 8, we can find the set of front post treble crochets closer to us, like so. We're going to work our back post treble crochets the same by inserting our hook from the front and wrapping around. So let's get started. We're going to find that first treble crochet post, which is right here. We're going to yarn over, and to go from the front, we can put our work again closer to us, and we're going to insert a hook from the front, and we're going to go into the next gap, making sure that our treble crochet is in front of our hook. We're going to yarn over a loop for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first loop for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the remaining 2 loops for our next back post treble crochet. And so we're going to see that if we look to the front, it's actually extending that treble crochet from the previous row as well. We're going to do it 3 more times. So let's begin. We're going to yarn over, insert hook from the front of our work, wrapping it around the next treble crochet post, making sure it's in front of our hook. We're going to yarn over a loop for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first loop for 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over through the remaining 2 loops for another back post treble crochet. Let's do the next 2 together. Yarn over, find that next treble crochet post. We're going to go into from the front, wrapping our crow hook around so that the post is in front. We're going to yarn over a loop for 3 loops on our hook. Yarn over through the first loop, yarn over through the first 2 loops, and yarn over through the next 2 loops. Find the next one, yarn over a loop, go from the front, wrap it around, yarn over a loop for 3 loops on our hook, yarn over through the first loop, yarn over through the first 2 loops, yarn over through 2 loops. And there is our second set of 4 back post treble crochets, and now we finished the back part of a cable stitch, which is a total of 8 back post treble crochets. If we turn our work to the front, you can see that it's twisting these treble crochets and extending them for that texture that we'd like to have. From here, we will insert double crochets into the next 4 stitches. Take care not to go into these stretch gap stitches because these are actually stitches that correspond to the treble crochets we make. If we line up our work properly by pulling our work flat, you'll be able to see the next available stitch clearer, since this crochet post actually leans more to the left, so that gap actually corresponds to this stitch, meaning our next available stitch is actually the stitch next to that gap. So let's do our double crochets. Once done inserting 4 double crochets in the next stitch, we can move on to the next step.
We finished our 4 double crochets. We will now repeat the back post treble crochet sets 3 more times in order to match the same number of the cable stitches that we did in the previous row. I'll show you how to do it slowly, and feel free to follow along. Once we've done our 4th set, we can move on to the next step. Now that we've done our 4th back post treble crochet set, as well as the 4 double crochets after it, we can continue inserting double crochets into the remaining 24 stitches of the row. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finish our double crochets. We can now chain 2 and turn our work to start row 5 and onwards. From here, the pattern repeats, alternating between row 3 and row 4. We will repeat rows until row 10. We finished our 28 double crochets. We will now start the cable stitch. It's the same as before with skipping the next 4 stitches and then inserting 4 front post treble crochets and then inserting 4 front post treble crochets in the previous skip stitches. The difference now is that starting from row 5 and any more odd rows is that we'll be going into the treble crochets that are getting extended each time. Now let's begin. So skip the next 4 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's that first available stitch, and you'll see that it's actually connected to the treble crochet below it, and we're gonna work directly under it. So yarn over, insert a hook behind that treble crochet post, yarning over a loop for 3 loops on a hook, yarn over through the first loop for 3 loops on a hook, yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on a hook, yarn over through the remaining 2 loops for a front post treble crochet. And we're going to do this 3 more times. So let's do the next one. Here's that second front post treble crochet, yarning over a loop for 3 loops on our hook, yarn over through the first loop, yarn over through the first 2 loops, yarn over through the remaining 2 loops. And as we've done before, we can grab a stitch marker, mark that 4th latest treble crochet that we did, as well as the stitch matching it. And then now we go into the previous 4 skip stitches, which is here. So you may have to stretch your work as usual, and you'll see they're actually the treble crochets from the previous back row that we did. And we're just going to do the same thing, yarning over a loop, inserting hook into the treble crochet, yarning over a loop for 3 loops on our hook, yarn over through the first loop only for 3 loops on our hook, yarn over through the first 2 loops for 2 loops on our hook, yarn over through the remaining 2 loops. And we're going to do this 3 more times in the remaining 3 skip stitches. So remember to stretch your work so that you can see it much more clearer. There you go, there's that cable stitch, and you can see that it's making that twist that we'd like. Now we can go back into inserting 4 double crochets into the next available stitches. So here's that latest double crochet. We're going to go into the stitch next to that stitch marker for 4 double crochets. can remove that stitch marker for reuse. And yeah, that's how we will do the cable stitch with the same pattern as we've always done. And you're going to do it for the rest of the rows.
We finished our repeat rows. We're now ready to chain 2 and turn our work to start row 11. We will now be doing increases to add space for our chest bust area. We'll be inserting double crochet increases in the first 2 stitches of the row. Afterwards, continue to insert double crochets and follow the cable stitch pattern as normal. Once you've reached the last 2 stitches of the row, we can move on to the next step. We're at the last 2 stitches of the row. From here, we will insert double crochet increases in the last 2 stitches. And that's our first increase row. We are adding 4 to our stitch count every time we do an increase row, which makes our stitch count for this row to now be 104. We can now chain 2 and turn our work to start row 12 and onwards. Our even rows after the increases are the same as row 4, with the difference being that our stitch count is just 4 more. So we will insert double crochets as normal at the start. We're going to do the back post treble crochets as normal, and then we're going to double crochet until the end. So once we're done, we can move on to the next step. We finished row 12, and now we can chain 2 and turn our work to start row 13 and onwards. From here, we're going to alternate between row 11 and row 12 until row 14. So we will do our increases in the odd row, row 13, and then our matching back post treble crochet set in even row 14. Our total stitch count for these rows will be 108. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our repeat rows. We can chain 2 and turn our work to start row 15 and row 16. We will no longer be increasing. Our total stitch count should be 108. We will follow our regular double crochet and 4 cable stitch pattern with double crochets as normal. For row 16, we will do our matching double crochet and treble crochet sets just as we do in previous rows. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our back post treble crochet sets and double crochets. We're now ready to chain 2 and turn our work to start row 17. We will now be inserting decreases in the first 4 stitches for a total of 2 decreases. From here, we will continue inserting double crochets and cable stitches as normal. Once you've reached the last 4 stitches of the row, we can move on to the next step. We're at the last 4 stitches of the row. We will insert decreases in these last 4 stitches for a total of 2 decreases. This marks the end of our decrease row, with our stitch count being subtracted by a total of 4 stitches. Our stitch count is now 104 for the row. We can chain 2 and turn our work to start row 18. Row 18 is the same as our matching double crochet and back post treble crochet sets as we've done in previous even rows. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our back post treble crochet sets and double crochets. We can chain 2 and turn our work to start row 19 and onwards. We will now alternate repeat row 17 and row 18, decreasing in the first 4 stitches and last 4 stitches of row 19 and continuing double crochets and cable stitches as normal, with our stitch count total being 100. We will end on row 20, which is the pattern of double crochets and back post treble crochet sets. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished at row 20 with a total stitch count of 100 for the row. We are now ready to slip stitch our work together. We will fold our work sandwich like so, making sure that the outside part is the wrong side of the work, which in this case is the back post treble crochet sets. You want that facing outward for the slip stitches. Once we folded our work, we're going to insert our hook into each matching hole on either side of the work, and we're going to insert a slip stitch from the top to the bottom of the work to close out our top. So we're going to insert our hook into that matching space on the other side, like so, running over a loop for slip stitches. And you can line up your work and you'll see that they mirror each other on both sides. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished slip stitching our work, ready to now fasten off and cut our yarn, leaving a tail long enough for weaving. So chain 1, grab our scissors, and we're going to cut our work. Pull that yarn through to fasten off. You may find that the increases and decrease sections protrude a bit. Once we flip our work to the right side up, which is where the cable stitches are located, it'll even out. Now we are ready to move on to the next step, which are the sleeves. To start the sleeves, let's start with a slip knot. We're going to do 30 chainless single foundation crochets. Once done, we can move on to the next step. Finished our 30 chainless single foundation crochets. We will now rotate our work. And from here, we're going to slip stitch into the single crochet on the opposite end, forming a circle for the sleeves. This counts as round 1. We're now going to chain 2, remembering that our chains do not count as a stitch, meaning we will always insert a stitch into the same space as our chains. We're going to insert double crochets into the next 29 stitches around until the last stitch of the round. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finish our double crochets in the first 29 stitches and use the last stitch of the round. We're going to insert a double crochet decrease into the last stitch and into the first stitch of the round in the same space as our first double crochet. Be careful not to mistake the slip stitches from previous rounds as a stitch, since we're not going to be crocheting into these. From here, we will back slip stitch into the 2 chains from the start of the round. To back slip stitch, you're going to insert your hook from the back of the stitch into both loops, like so, and we're going to do a regular slip stitch. This marks the end of a round. We can chain 2, and we're now ready to start round 3. If you'd like, you can use a stitch marker to mark the chain 2s for easier slip stitches after each round. We will double crochet in the first 29 stitches until we are at the last stitch of the round. Remember that we will insert a double crochet into the same space as our chain 2. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our double crochets in the first 29 stitches, and here is our last stitch of the round. We're going to insert a double crochet decrease into the last stitch of the round to the first stitch. From here, we will back slip stitch into the 2 chains at the start of the round. We can chain 2, and we can now start row 4. From here, we're going to repeat the same pattern of row 3 until row 5. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our repeat rows at round 5. We can chain 2 and start round 6. We're going to now be doing double crochet decreases in the first and second stitch. Once done, we're going to continue inserting double crochets into the next 28 stitches. Once we're at the last stitch, we can move on to the next step. We're at the last stitch of round 6. From here, we're going to double crochet decrease from the last stitch into the first stitch of the round, as we've done before. It may be hard to find that first stitch, but you can stretch your work out so you can find the first stitch of the round. From here, we're going to back slip stitch into the first chain as normal. We can chain 2 to start round 7 and onwards. We're going to repeat round 6 until round 10. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our repeat decrease rows at round 10. Our stitch count should be 25 stitches for this round. We can chain 2 to start round 11 and onwards. We will no longer be decreasing in the first and second stitch. We're going to insert double crochets in the first 24 stitches. Once at the last stitch, we can move on to the next step. We're at the last stitch of round 11. We're going to insert a double crochet decrease from the last stitch into the first stitch of the round. And from here, we can do a back slip stitch into the chain, and we can chain 2 to start round 12 and onwards. We're going to repeat round 11 until round 20. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our repeat rounds at round 20. We can chain 2 and start round 21. We will now be increasing in the first stitch of the round by inserting 2 double crochets in the first stitch. From here, we're going to continue inserting double crochets into the next stitches until the last stitch. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We're at the last stitch of round 21. We're going to do a double crochet decrease from the last stitch of the round into the first stitch of the round as we've done previously. We can do a back slip stitch into the chain. And from here, our total stitch count for this round is now 26. We can chain 2 and start round 22 and onwards. We're going to repeat round 21 until round 28. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our repeat rounds until round 28. Our total stitch count is 33. We can chain 2 and start round 29 and onwards. We will no longer be increasing in the first stitch. We're going to continue inserting double crochets in each stitch until the last stitch. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We're at the last stitch of round 29. We will double crochet decrease from the last stitch to the first stitch of the round as we've previously done. We can back slip stitch into the chains, and we can chain 2 to start round 30 and onwards. We will now repeat round 29 until round 37. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our repeat rounds at round 37 with the total stitch count still at 33. We can chain 1 and cut to fasten off. This is our first sleeve. We will repeat the exact same steps once more for a second sleeve. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished both our sleeves and now we're ready to attach them to our work. So grab your main piece of work and we're going to flip our work so the inside out is showing. You can tell by seeing the back seam of our top. We're going to mark our sleeves by counting the stitches away from the seam. Our first set of stitch markers is 13 stitches away from the seam. So here's that seam. Here's the next stitch to the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And we're going to mark this stitch with a stitch marker. From here, we're going to count 9 stitches away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we're going to mark a second stitch marker, and this is going to be the indicator for our sleeve attachment. Now that we've marked our sleeve attachment, we're going to take one of the sleeves, make sure that it's inside out so that you can see the seam, and we're going to place it so that seam is along the stitch markers, like so. And we're going to count from the seam of the sleeve, which is right here, to match it with the stitch markers. So let's begin. So here's that seam, and we're going to count 5 stitches away from the seam. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This stitch, we're going to match it with this stitch marker on the right here. You can take your stitch marker and slide it through both stitches so that they're aligned. Here you go. And now we're going to do the same thing on the left side of the sleeve seam this time. So here's that seam again, counting 5 stitches away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here's the next stitch we're going to attach to this second stitch marker for the sleeve alignment. You can do so like this. Now that we've marked the alignment with stitch markers, we can turn our work so that the sleeve is facing away from us and the main work is towards us. We can now slip stitch so that the seam alignment for the sleeves is attached to the chest body. So insert your hook through the stitch marker on the right, through both of those stitches. So here's that main work stitch, through the sleeve stitch, and make a slip knot. And we're just going to pull it through both of the stitches through the stitch marker and make a slip stitch. And we're now going to slip stitch through the main work and the sleeve stitch alignment until we get to this second stitch marker. take care not to count the seam as a stitch. You should have in total 10 slip stitches. Now that we've slip stitched our sleeve to the main body, we can now chain 2 to start round 1 of the shoulder area. We're going to do a double crochet decrease from the current stitch into the next available stitch on the sleeve. So let's do that together. Gonna yarn over, insert a hook in the same stitch as our slip stitch that we currently are in, yarning over loop and doing the first part of a double crochet decrease. We're gonna yarn over, find the next available stitch on the sleeve. So you may need to turn your work above so that you can see the next available stitch. So this stitch is in it since we are currently slip stitch into it. We're going to go into the next stitch to complete our double crochet decrease. And there we go. We're now ready to double crochet into each stitch around the sleeve. Once we make it to the last stitch of the sleeve, we can move on to the next step. We're at the last stitch of the sleeve. After we've double crocheted around the sleeves from the start, we're now going to do a double crochet decrease from the last stitch into the stitch marker stitches that we marked right here. Make sure to go through both of the marked stitches from the stitch marker to complete our crochet decrease. There you go. From here, we're going to slip stitch into the next available stitch right next to the double crochet decrease that we just made into that first slip stitch marker. So here's the next stitch we're going to slip stitch into. And this marks the end of round 1 of the shoulders. We can chain 2 and turn our work to start round 2 of the shoulders. So you can see we're only going to be working into the sides of the sleeves so that we can make the shoulder part. We're now going to do a double crochet decrease into the current stitch that we're in into the next available stitch on the sleeve. So yarn over, insert a hook into the same stitch as the chain 2s that we've just made. We're going to double crochet decrease the next available stitch of the sleeve. We're going to continue to double crochet along the sleeve until you are at the last stitch of the round. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We're at the last stitch of the sleeves after double crocheting around. We're now going to do a double crochet decrease from the last stitch into the previous stitches row right here on the main work. So yarn over and do a double crochet decrease from the last stitch and you can find the previous stitches row if you stretch your work out, and you find the next stitch we're going to double crochet decrease into. We can now slip stitch into the next available stitch right here. And this marks the end of round 2 for the shoulders. We can chain 2 and turn our work to start round 3 and onwards. We're going to be essentially repeating round 2, so let's do it together. So we're going to double crochet decrease into the current slip stitch that we just made into the next available stitch on the sleeve. And we're going to continue inserting double crochets around the sleeves until we reach the last stitch of the sleeve again. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We're at the last stitch of the sleeve after double crocheting around. We're going to do a double crochet decrease from the last stitch into the previous stitch of the row that we did here. So let's do that double crochet decrease. You can find it by aligning your work and stretching it to find the next available stitch to double crochet decrease into. There we go. And we're going to slip stitch into the next stitch right next to that double crochet decrease. And that marks the end of round 3. We're going to repeat this pattern of chaining 2, turning our work, and double crochet decreasing, and then double crochets, and then double crocheting decreasing again until you've done about 9 rounds. Once done, we can move on to the next step. We finished our shoulder repeat rows. We finished at round 15. We can chain 1 and cut to fasten off. We will do the exact same pattern of marking and adding onto the rows for the other sleeve attachment shoulders. I went ahead and did it off camera, but you can see that the sleeves should match as well. Feel free to try on your work if you'd like to adjust how many rows you want or rounds for the shoulders. And yeah, now we can weave in our ends. For some weaving tips, always weave in on the wrong side of the work so you can find it by turning your work inside out and seeing the seams that we slip stitch into. Here's an example of an end that we have to weave in. We're going to take our tapestry needle, slip through our work, and we're going to slip it through the work behind stitches so that it'll stay hidden once we put it on. And we're done. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Feel free to tag me on any socials. I'd love to see your work. Thanks!